So, welcome everybody to this late panel on Saturday, June 5th, as part of the Nice Fiction Science Fiction Festival, or Festival of the Imagination, more broadly understood. With us today are three distinguished guests from France and Italy, and I'll be getting them to speak about today's topic, Solarpunk. From France, we have Hugo Belagamba, a versatile lecturer and researcher in the history of law and political ideas at the University of Nice. A short story writer and novelist, he is also known as an organizer of science fiction gatherings, large and small, catering to both mass audiences and the cognoscenti. From France, Sylvie Denis, who is a multi-talented wonder. An award-winning author since the 1980s, she has shown both as a short story writer and a novelist. Furthermore, she is a noted translator known for her translations into French of Greg Egan, Robin Hobb, and Alastair Reynolds. A former magazine editor, she is also a keen science fiction critic and occasional essayist. And from Italy, Francesco Verso, a writer, publisher, editor, and literary agent. An award-winning author in Italian, he has penned poems, short stories, and novels. As the founder of Future Fiction, he has published multiple books and anthologies gathering the best of international science fiction, translated into Italian and often made available in English as well. Before moving on to our discussion, I will attempt to present a quick history of solarpunk in books, which may well overlap with Francesco's earlier presentation, but I actually intend to delay until later any in-depth discussion of what solarpunk is. I think we often get lost in definitional debates. But what I'm going to do is offer a kind of my own personal view as an author myself and someone who's been on the scene for many decades. And let's see if this works. So hopefully you are seeing my PowerPoint presentation very quickly as such. And my observation is that about 10 years ago, in the science fiction community, especially in English, but also perhaps in French, a number of science fiction writers and observers felt that the field had grown overly dark and pessimistic about the future. That you had also the ongoing rise of fantasy, the Lord of the Rings, a worldwide success, Harry Potter, and so on. So in bars and convention, possibly I repeat myself, there was talk of getting back to basics, where the basics of science fiction included science technology, optimism, and a sense of wonder. Now, this led in two different directions. One direction in the English-speaking world gave us books like Engineering Infinity, and which became a series, I believe, and Hieroglyph in 2014. But the hard SF focus of the former could not compete, even though they were kind of substantially the same in many ways, with the promise of the latter, right there on the cover, as you can see, a better future. And I think that is what we have seen the rise of in the last 10 years. Oops, that was too quick. And the idea is that around 2012, you have, for instance, the solarpunk.net website beginning to define solarpunk as, and a solarpunk vision, inspired, of course, by the cyberpunk genre and all of its derivatives over the years. But that vision went into several directions: green, sustainable tech, low tech, so not quite the same thing necessarily, and also hopeful about the future, hopeful about what the future could do. By 2013, you had a first anthology called Solarpunk by Brazilian and Portuguese writers. And if you look at their subtitle, they were talking about sustainable tech. By 2015, you have another Solarpunk anthology coming from a different direction, actually from where I'm speaking to you right now, that is to say Quebec City, because Claudie Arsenault in 2015 penned both a novel, which she described as a meeting point of dystopia and solarpunk, viral airwaves, and co-edited an anthology fusing solarpunk, dragons, and hope. By the last second half of the decade, the titles multiply. You have the English language translation of that Brazilian anthology from 2013. You have a small press publisher in the US coming out with Sunvault. You've got World Weaver Press coming up with one of its first anthologies that you can see there. And it is an international movement. Just in the last 5 years, we've seen an anthology like Dimension Avenir Radieux from France, which did not present itself, I will hasten to say, as a solarpunk anthology, but that did want to present more optimistic futures, possibly even feasible utopias. So I feel no remorse about including it here, especially since one of my stories in that anthology also shows up in the last one on the page, Solarpunk, dalla disperazione alla strategia. And Hugo and Francesco, please forgive my Italian accent. Very bad. But as you can see, you also have books coming out from the US, from both World Weaver Press, but also from other publishers such as Cities of Light. And of course, which is why Francesco Verso is here, we have some of the future fiction anthologies called Solarpunk, the one in 2020 last year, and the one that just came out this year. So that is all for my quick presentation to kind of situate the audience, I hope, and the panelists will do the rest in terms of presenting the genre. So before getting into the always dicey matter of definitions, I'm going to ask each of you about your own connection with solarpunk. How do you relate to this subgenre? Is it mainly as a writer, an editor, or a reader? Does somebody want to speak up first? Hugo, you look ready.
I'm always ready, you know. So for me, Solarpunk, it's very recent. I think I realized that Solarpunk exists since I think 2 years, not even more. And speaking with Francesco, about Solarpunk and trying to understand what was Solarpunk. And in my work as a writer, there is no particularly solarpunk. I use matters of utopias, and I like to recall remembering the origin of utopia. And for me, I would say, just very simply, that solarpunk is a return to basic of science fiction, like was cyberpunk or like was steampunk before. And in one way, the solarpunk is a returning to the basics of science fiction and utopia too. In 2 ways, I would say. First, reaching a new solution for a new world, trying to make a new vision of the institution, political institution and societies. And on the other hand, solarpunk would be like the utopias, trying to build a future bottom up. I mean, building the future with the people, with the education of the people, and not only waiting a solution from the state. And so for me, Solarpunk is, it makes me remembering about old utopias.
Sylvie?
Well, it has a very funny feeling about solarpunk, because in fact I've always thought when I was a kid, well, nature, that there would be solar arrays just about everywhere, and that the future would run on solar power, and that it would be a fusion of ecological thought, technology, and nature, with this probably utopian idea of technology that would not destroy nature, which is what we have at the moment. In fact, I've had to catch up with everything that has been published recently, because I haven't had the time to read everything. And it's very interesting for me to see that there are people, young people, who seem to see things in a similar way, and I'm very glad of that, and also the fact that well, it's a politically aware movement, which I like very much, I must say. That's it for the moment. I'm really glad it exists, in fact.
I will also kind of interject that being about the same age as Sylvie, I also kind of grew up with a lot of environmentally themed science fiction, and back in the 80s and 90s and 70s, there was a lot of science fiction that allowed us to look to a future that would be ecological and that would involve, yeah, new sources of power. So, Francesco, I'm sure you have a lot to say about this. Over to you.
Well, first of all, I want to say that I'm so proud to be with 3 authors that I've published on future fiction. So, first of all, this is my welcome to you, because I feel like of course I'm the publisher of all of you. So Sylvie Denis was on the first anthology of Solarpunk with her story Contamination, if I pronounce it correctly. So even though maybe she is not so aware of the fact that she was writing Solarpunk, a beautiful story which I included in the first collection. And so I'm waiting for Ugo to do the same in the next future, now that he's aware of the topics that we're talking about. And Jean-Louis, you said you're on the second anthology of Solarpunk, so you already have been writing about eco speculation. I know you are already well aware of the issue that, of course, as you said, are not completely new. The relationship between man and environment and how technology intercepts these two elements is old. It's something that dates back probably even to Dune, if we want to have a kind of prototype,
Yes.
even before, of course. So in a way, the issue of sustainability has grown exponentially over the last years, because we haven't listened to the warnings that were maybe even written by science fiction writers in a way, or scientists in another. My personal involvement is I started as a writer, because I realized that I've probably written one of the first Solarpunk novels called I Camminatori, The Walkers, back in 2018. It took me 8 years to write this book, so it dates back. I mean, the reasoning and the work and the research. But then, as an editor, I thought that this number of short fiction stories that were coming up deserved a better, let's say, place, or a better a product, namely an anthology that would kind of define the borders, the limits, trying to show what it was. And of course, it's not a single definition. We are kind of working towards also an open definition. The Solarpunk is flexible. It has to adapt. It has a rhizomatic. It has a very adaptive, strategic flavor to the kind of fixed, monothematic, simplistic way of life, of way of marketing, of way of producing. This is the kind of change that we're trying to introduce. Complexity, inclusivity, multiculturality, this kind of sophistication that probably is more difficult to do because people like to think in black and white. But I think if we want to grow this movement, we have to embrace this level of complexity involving translation, involving opening our mind to different economies, different voices. People call it diversity, even though I don't like it. I prefer to call it inclusivity because we are all different, and who sets the standard of the diversity from which we have to judge the others? No, we don't have to judge the others. We have to study, appreciate. So we're moving from a way of cultural appropriation to a cultural appreciation, in the sense that we reject the idea of a single point of view, but the future arises from a multiplicity of visions. And of course, it's more complicated to cooperate, than to dictate orders. But if we want to have a chance against these hyper objects that are on the horizon, climate change, Anthropocene, Capitalocene, I think we need to approach these themes in a different way, as we did before, even as science fiction writers.
Thank you. Before we move on, I wanted to take advantage of the presence of Hugo and Francesco here to ask them a couple of, you could say, questions that may be of interest to science fiction fans over the rest of the year. Hugo, you are helping, I believe, to organize the French National Convention of Science Fiction, known this year as the BlueCon, in August in Nice. Will Solarpunk be a programming item?
That's a very nice question. I think in one sense it will, yes, it will, because we're gonna make a sort of history of publication in science fiction, in French science fiction, history of the fanzine, the magazines, and we will probably try to find some thematic, some huge thematic across the time. And as I think the Solarpunk is a new world story for an old purpose of science fiction, as Francesco has said very well. And so I think we will speak about Solarpunk. It's not programmed already a panel about Solarpunk, but I'm pretty sure we will speak about Solarpunk, yes.
I can look into Cyber Dreams and see if we published anything that
would be very great.
Label Solarpunk. I don't remember, but
or eco-fiction, perhaps.
Yeah, I'm sure we can find the first moves about Solarpunks before.
So, Francesco, I believe, I may be mistaken, that you're helping to organize the European Science Fiction Convention, known as the Eurocon, in July. Do you know if Solarpunk will be a programming topic?
Of course it will. Absolutely, no doubt about that. I mean, if it's me, I mean, I have to, hammer and nail it down, because yes, hammer it, because the mainstream storytelling, it's still pretty much dystopic, cyberpunk and post-apocalyptic scenario. So I'm not saying we have to shift. I'm saying we have to add, okay? Add something to the conversation. Nobody's saying that we will all, be shiny, happy people, right? I'm saying that we are trying to add another kind of narrative to broaden the vision, to enlarge the possibilities, and to include something that is not so hopeful as people might think is quite the opposite. We want to fight back. We want to find the energy that are in the resilience against this kind of system, because maybe um, we don't know what other alternative we have, but as long as we don't explore, as long as we don't try, we will just always be left with the worst possible of the worlds, even though somebody call it the best. But what is the best for someone is actually the worst for the majority of the population in the world. Think about climate injustice, how that is deploying into the majority of the countries, how the surveillance capitalism is going from Western countries to the Eastern countries. No difference at all between what is happening in China and what is happening with our smartphones. So all these ways of extracting power, extracting resources, we have become humans as the ultimate resource of the late capitalism. We need to imagine something, right? Otherwise, what we're going to do? Write again and again another dystopia? I think that as a propagation of the same old story being told over and over again. So just to just for a change, we might explore a different universe, which basically is the hardcore idea of science fiction, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sylvie, you are known as an astute observer of the state of the field. In 2000,
Yes,
your introduction to the French anthology Escale 2001 pointed out the simultaneous awareness of accelerated change in many fields.
that was 20
Yes,
years
yes,
ago.
but
Oh my God.
I haven't
Oh my God.
forgotten. And simultaneous disinterest, especially in France, for the science fiction writers, is actually trying to imagine where it was all heading. Today, we appear to have a situation where science fiction writers are invited to almost jump aboard the bandwagon and confirm through their stories that the future will be green, solar, and multicultural. What do you think? What is your view of what Solarpunk is good for? Or anybody else could answer that, if you're.
Well,
If you
I
want.
think uh, I had the same opinion as Francesco, because I think he said something like the Anthropocene and the climate change are somewhere on the horizon, but they're not on the horizon. We're inside it. We're already inside it.
Mm-hmm.
The climate change is already there. Except that you feel it more depending on which place on earth you live. If you live in India or in Bangladesh, or if you live in Greenland, you feel it much more harshly than if you live in France, for many reasons, because the climate. I've lost the word. Never mind. The climate changes are much stronger in some places on Earth than others. I absolutely agree with the idea that if you don't imagine solutions, they never exist. You have to run them in your mind before you actually make them exist. That's the way ideas get born inside people's head, and then get performed in the real world. You have to make thought experiments. And that's what science fiction does. So why not try to imagine what a world where solutions exist? What would it look like? And in contaminations, I imagine the story is from the point of view of somebody who was born in the year 2000. And she is, I think she's about 80 when she, at the end of the story, but the story is divided. It goes from 10 years to 10 years, and you follow her. And she's absolutely desperate because she lives in a community which is based on ecology and community and help, collaboration between people. But unfortunately, our sons, they're more like the kind of eco-minded people I don't like very much, the kind who believe in strange things, supernatural stuff and all that, and she's really not happy about that, and it's as usual I've managed to pack quite a lot of things in a very short text, because there have been several steps in the political landscapes, and there was a kind of nice period in which the people actually did something about climate change, and then the voters changed their minds, as they do, and they voted back the old guys, the ones we know. So there are actually no good guys and no bad guys in this story, because I don't like to make things like that. And I don't know what I was trying to say, and I've forgotten Jean-Louis' question, but
why cyberpunk? Solarpunk, sorry.
Solarpunk.
Well, yes, well, politics.
Politics.
Politics and finding solutions. Otherwise, what do we do? Just wait until we all die from heat stroke. I mean, it's ridiculous.
I would like to add something about Solarpunk. It's very interesting for me because it says to us that we are not obligated to be afraid of technology. And it's not a rejection of technology, it's a possibility to use it in another way. And I think in the history of science fiction, we have always had this vision to how to use technology well for sustainable energy, for equality between people. And I think the Solarpunk says to us that we are not obligated to reject technology in the same basket with capitalism and all the mistakes we have made, but we can use now a positive vision of technology to change the world. Perhaps we cannot repair the world, but we can try to build a new world with the progress, the best technology we have now. And that's a very important thing, because I would dislike completely a sort of science fiction with absolutely no technology. And it's not the case in the Solarpunk. It's not a criticism about technology itself. That's nice.
I want to add something very important on this point, because one of the main pillars of Solarpunk is native innovation, in the sense that if we rewind history a little bit before capitalism, or one way of capitalism took over the world, in the sense of one way of producing things, or one system of industrial production, and one vision of progress, namely the Western one. If we rewind a bit, we find out that many and important countries had their own style, their own way, their own brands, their own path to the future, which has been completely devastated and erased by the rise of global Western capitalism. So the seeds are there. And I think that Solarpunk has the responsibility of waking all the sleepers. Think about the huge countries like China, India, Brazil, Mexico. They all have the power, but they've been enslaved one way or another by the Western point of view, by the Western vision. And I would say, if you consider the number of books on every single bookstore in the world that is being written in English and published in English, that applies also to science fiction, because we also have to change the distribution of these books in order to include and let the other vision of the world gather and contribute to the a more or better or fairer distribution of visions. So I think Solarpunk has something to say about that.
I'm going to add a point that perhaps will make Hugo happy. I'm going to talk about law and technology. And Hugo has been kind of making the point that Solarpunk is, in a sense, mostly just good science fiction. And it reminds me, in fact, of what Isaac Asimov was trying to do when he came up with the 3 laws of robotics. They were a way for Asimov reasoned that new technologies are coming along all the time. Some of them are scary, such as robots, and he talks sometimes of the Frankenstein complex. And yet, when we use knives or other dangerous technologies, we have safeguards. And so the 3 laws of robotics were a safeguard for making robots safe, basically. But more broadly speaking, the point was about making technologies safe. Solarpunk is, you could say, about moralizing technology, making sure that the technologies of the future are used in the right way. So far, I'm not sure I've seen a lot of Solarpunk stories, but I haven't read as many as I would like to, that propose to do this through a kind of binding legal framework or inbuilt laws in the same way that Asimov was thinking of them. But certainly, I think there is something of the same goal, or at least the same thought, behind, indeed, the idea that we can have sustainable technology to kind of both preserve a human future and preserve the world's natural environment. Does that?
Yeah, I just had rethinking about utopias, because I have studied some utopias of the 18th and 19th centuries, and there is always the education of people, of citizens, which is very important. I mean, perhaps in Solarpunk we can find the same necessity, that if we have the good education to use technology safe, and not only with the laws, but with only the common sense, I would say, it will be possible to keep our technology and to build a better world. And that was an idea we find too in the very beginning of the history of science fiction, in the book of Gernsback and Amazing Stories. It was a little idealistic to think that the technology will change the world for a better world, in fact. But if we have the education, and if we think about the use of the technology by the people themselves, not with a specialist or with elitism about this, it could be a better world.
Yeah, that's the point. Oh, sorry.
That happens with the people like the maker movement, and people who want to recycle stuff and reuse and repurpose all the things we make, but I don't believe in common sense in this respect, because if you don't make I mean, take Jeff Bezos or one of the few billionaires we have.
Elon Musk.
Yes, that one too. If nobody makes them do the right things with those huge heaps of money they have. They're not going to do it. What's his name?
Bill Gates.
Yes, Bill Gates does interesting things with the vaccines and all that. But there is stuff that which is dangerous and which creates pollutions, and no state tries to forbid it. And the only way to stop people buying them is to forbid the stuff. That's it. That's my Stalinist little Stalinist vision of some of those things. Because, for example, at the moment I'm obsessing on plastic, and for example, shampoo. Okay, that's hundreds and thousands of bottles. They end up in your your bin, and they're not recycled. Just forbid them, and there won't be tons of plastic bottles or shampoo bottles or whatever. But that's a dream too. I think.
I slightly disagree with Jean-Louis, because actually the rules were meant for slaves and were then applied to robots, in the sense that we tend to always have the point of view from the scientist, the rational man, but we never thought about the robot itself or the android, right? So now the narrative would be more like ex machina than the laws of robotic. And on another point of view, we tend to think more and more in an anthropocentric point of view, in the sense that we don't project ourselves into the psychology of the robot or the android, where Solarpunk appeals for an interspecies or a less anthropocentric point of view, in the sense that we should include all these other, I don't know, maybe artificial intelligence will, you know, keep up with us or even overcome us, as in the beautiful movies that we're seeing lately, for example, Her, right? So we need to, again, broaden the vision and let this old vision of the past, how science fiction was depicted and brought up by masters, of course. But maybe now is the time we make a step farther and, you know, look at the consequences of the progress. And the consequences of the progress is that we will have to make room for other entities and start to cope with it, whether is biotechnology, so whether we are tweaking with our genome, how do we relate with humans that are slightly different from the basic biological natural way? Do we have to augment ourselves? And if we do augment ourselves, how do we treat these different species? Will animals have the same rights as we do have? As will artificial intelligence have the same rights as we have? So maybe, yes, Hugo can have a say on these, but if we are ready to give up our usual and traditional anthropocentric point of view, then we might find something interesting.
Well, I don't know if I have to answer because it's not
as you want.
Well, go ahead if you have an answer.
I would say, but it's not the topic exactly of today, but I would say that if we could find a way to make a relation between artificial intelligence and individuality, liberty of the individuals. I mean, if we could use the capacity of the artificial intelligence to help people to be themselves completely free and happy, it would be very helpful. One of the way to think artificial intelligence as a solarpunk in a solarpunk way will be, you know, like Kipling called this daemon, the voice you have close to you and give you advice and share with your feelings and try to make you make the good choice. And it's like in the movie Her, quote by Francesco. I think we could use these to help people to be less depressive, less sad, less alone, less completely in despair. And perhaps it should be a way to use artificial intelligence to help people to feel better. But it's a dream, of course, because when you use artificial intelligence and you let it interact with people, it became fascist in 2 days.
Yes.
So there is a problem with humans, I think.
It would be interesting to imagine how not to make it a fascist.
Yeah, we have to change ourselves before.
Yeah. Or I don't know how I didn't read anything closely about this, but I guess it depends on what they fed the intelligence with. So just give it Solarpunk, and it's going to be better, and we can have a talk with it and be less lonely, which would be nice.
The problem there now, they are mostly programmed in the Silicon Valley, you know, or in the Chinese Silicon Valley of Shenzhen and Guangdong and all in that part. So there's a bias of global capitalism injected into the algorithms at the moment. So that's why I would say, like, we should, you know, let the technology be free, be open source, give it to the people, and then you will see interesting things. But normally the system doesn't want to give it to the people. And when you give it to the people, you have amazing things, like the internet wasn't meant for the people, but when then it became the World Wide Web, you know. So a military application became the way we're now here today, you know?
Well, certainly fraternity and sorority among species and entities is something I think that is quite solar punkish. And after all, we saw that one of the early anthologies had dragons, and so they might have been. And though you could certainly probably kind of see them as an allegory of something from that point of view, in terms of simply the broadening of the company of entities in a future solarpunk world. I think that that is not so far from what we're talking about. Whether we're looking at this latest anthology called Multi-Species City, and there are various ideas floating around the urban planners about integrating more species rather than less within cities, and of course the idea that artificial intelligence will provide us with company and companions is something that's been around since, in a sense, Asimov. I think his first robot story was about a robot nursemaid, as I recall.
Exactly.
So you have this has very distant roots. I'll just come back to something a point we've made a couple of times, and which was made also online before this panel started. And it's this tension, you could say, between solarpunk and dystopias. And indeed, we've seen a lot of apocalyptic science fiction, or disaster as SF, as it could also be called, and which is often reminiscent of religious tales of the